All right, welcome back to Seaside Joe, a football podcast, a show that, well, you mean I've had a show for many years of some form or iteration, but in this case, I said early on in 2022, the beginning, before Russell Wilson was traded, I'm going to focus all of Seaside Joe's efforts on how did the Seahawks contend for a Super Bowl again, because it really felt after that 7-10 season that something was definitely over and would have to restart. And so it's just about all the big things. And I planned out, even the morning of Russell Wilson's trade, the Seaside Joe newsletter that went out that day was about whether or not the Seahawks had done a real good enough job of building a team around Russell Wilson. And then moments later, Russell Wilson was traded to the Broncos, and it amplified this mission to really talk about how the Seahawks, I don't like the term rebuild in football because careers are so short. You don't get these baseball. I mean, I can't believe that I haven't followed baseball closely in over 10 years, and I'm still recognizing the names of players who are apparently even still in the middle of their careers.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, how is that guy? How is Albert Pujols in the home run competition? I don't understand. So that doesn't happen in football with anyone other than Tom Brady. So, I just don't really like the term rebuild because the coaches are always fired, and there's just no way to really do that. But the Russell Wilson trade opens up the Seahawks for a clear end point on one era and a next point on the other. And maybe we are in the nexus between Russell Wilson and the next franchise quarterback. So today on the Seaside Joe podcast, myself, Thad Wenatchee, aka Terrence Robinson. You can follow him on Twitter at ThadIsRad. Back again to talk about the Seahawks just 6 days out of training camp, so we can preview Seahawks training camp, preview the quarterback position, talk about this morning's newsletter, and that. Well, since it's on our heads, just talked about Twitter really quickly,
Yep.
and I want to get your thoughts on my thought here. First of all, you tell me this as somebody who observes and reads and knows Seaside Joe. Do you find the Twitter talk that I bring up? Do you find it to be? What do you think of it? Is it like I don't really care about this, and you can say anything that whatever the truth is. Are you like I don't really care so much about what people do on Twitter? I don't agree with that. I do agree with that. Like I wish that there was less of it because sometimes I think as I send it out, I'm like, I know there's people that really do not care about this. And I do appreciate and respect that opinion because I hold it as well in a certain way. But I also think like it is such it has been such a prominent part of my life. I assume it's been a prominent part of a lot of other people's lives. And I know that it reflects stuff that's going on in the real world in a way, no matter there's an unavoidable aspect to it.
Twitter, absolutely. I mean, I think no, I like how you've been tweeting lately. I think your newsletters correspond really well with your tweets. I really don't like follow comments, so I don't like see whether or not people are arguing or fighting back with you or patting you on the back. But I like how you've been more forward with your opinions and topics of your newsletters as somebody that follows you. I appreciate that. We were just talking off air about the concept of tweeting every day for a certain purpose, or maybe intended or not intended purpose, but you are still tweeting every day. But in terms of your numbers and where you're at, it's more about reaching out to the loyal fan base that follows you as opposed to like trying to move mountains,
Yeah, I would say
or open the skies, as you will,
Yeah, that's true. I don't, and I came into Twitter the second time around after a 2-year break with more of a philosophy and principles, which most people I don't think have any sort of philosophy or principles, not just in how they tweet or do social media, but it's a thing that's not in everybody's life. And I think it does help so much to at least know what your principles are when you go into tweeting and everything like that. I do think that because I do have such a small following, I don't get into arguments with anyone. Most of the people, as you say, who follow me have to be like fans. You know, there's no, I haven't built up any sort of group of people that hate me because nobody knows who I am. So there's that side to it. But I also think that one of the big things for me, and I do not really care to tweet at all. I think that sometimes there are points to be made that are only best made in that short amount of words. And I'm trying to, have more brevity, I guess. So there's that part of it where this makes the most sense in a small amount of words. I also know that there are internal motivations where it's where people do get on and they just think that they should tweet every thought that they have, and that every thought that they have is worthy of a tweet. And that's something that I definitely don't think is true. I believe one of my principles for tweeting, for anybody that did there in the media realm, would be really feel like you have something important to say before you hit send, and to really think that out, and to almost be in that position of only tweet, like write the tweet and then don't hit send, and then come back to it in an hour, and then see if you still feel like hitting send, because I find that almost anything that I tweeted in the past before my break, and sure, some of the stuff that I probably have tweeted now under the Seaside Joe account, it would be along the lines of something that I didn't really even care about. That's why I don't get into arguments with people online anymore, because I did for 5 or 6 years. In the comment sections, I've read tens of thousands of comments and contributed tens of thousands. And you just realize that any argument you have is completely meaningless to you after it's over. So what am I going through all of that for? That there's no point to getting upset at somebody on the internet anymore for me. And I even find that people like that, not getting, if you're just like, hey, it's all chill, man, let's chill, that most people are down to chill, And I think also one of the big principles also for me, for anyone out there, would be, if you tweet about football, just tweet about football. If you have these inclinations to tweet about Marvel movies or even baseball, or, jokes that you have, make a separate account and do it for that. I just think that there's no return on investment for people out there who are like, and if you just have a Twitter account because it's for you and your friends and there's no big deal to it, then do whatever you want. Then don't even listen to the advice. But if it's like you think you've got NFL, you work at the NFL network, or you've got something where you're saying, I'm trying to be an NFL update person, I'm trying to do this for the NFL, this is the NFL thing, I don't know why you would waste any of your real estate or any real estate for any person who follows you on their timeline with the things that they didn't sign up for. So why are you trying to, texturize your Twitter account with, I'm an NFL person, but you need to hear about my gym workout today. It just doesn't really make any sense to me, because that's why I think the only thing that Seaside Joe would ever tweet out is about the Seahawks, sometimes about the NFL, hopefully only if it relates to the Seahawks, just really trying to be like, hey, if you follow this Seahawks account, you're only guaranteed Seahawks tweets. There's other people who tweet about the Mariners. Why the hell would, and that's the one thing that they tweet about. I just don't understand being like, you can't assume that everybody who likes the Seahawks likes the Mariners, because a lot of them just don't follow both. I mean, I say this as you're wearing a Mariners hat, of course.
14, baby. 14 in a row.
Which is great. And you have people that are, that's all. I just think like a streamlined Twitter account, just like a streamlined newsletter, more so and more so. I think being streamlined and with your intent is very good.
Yeah, especially when you're not, you don't have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 followers, or more. I mean, or you don't fit into some certain niche, that's really a way to, like, it's just a way to focus what you're trying to do, keep yourself sane as well, because, we're all looking for the new, whatever the new is, and we're trying to figure out what it is, whether or not we're clamoring for it or pushing for it or forcing it. It's a very unsettled time right now. So to, help yourself by focusing your thoughts, focusing your creative ideas, frankly, I mean,
Yeah.
you're a creative person, you have the energy for it, but you're not really going to do yourself much service by doing some sort of stream of consciousness Twitter account, or even even your Seaside Joe chats. You could talk about anything, but it's easier for you. It's more focus. You could show the different sides of yourself by having the Seahawks be the focal point, and then branching off from there, injecting some humor, making references to some films you've seen, a little bit of political commentary, maybe not that much, but some sort of social commentary involved in that. But centered around the Seahawks, it makes it more palatable for yourself more than anything. Like, I've done a good amount of artist management and consulting with artists, and with a lot of young people, a lot of young creative people that are 16, 17, 18 years old, early 20s, and like their first question with me usually is, almost always is, how do I get famous online? And my advice to them is, it's rooted in how I had to figure it out, through the MySpace days, through the beginning of Instagram and everything like that, and Twitter. The first thing you got to do is whatever you can manage to do, right? Like, if you can only tweet once a week, or you can only, or you don't feel like tweeting that often, maybe once a month, even whatever you feel like doing, that's probably what you should start with. And then going from there is just the consistency element and branding yourself anyway. Because the whole thing about, like, there's sort of like a pushback, right, when somebody says your brand or whatever, right? Because then you feel like you're a commodity, or you're commodifying yourself, which we do commodify ourselves. At the same time, there's room for every brand, like, it's like if you and I were going to start a jeans company, we're going to start making jeans. Yeah, we could focus all our energy in making the best jeans for like slim waisted fit people, and then getting like famous fit waisted fit people to wear them and getting them in fashion shows or whatever. But also, there's so much space in the ecosphere that we could literally just try to represent any brand, any size, any shape, and we will find some sort of following. Getting to that extra platform is like completely random. Like, whoever makes it to the top of the mountain, right? As they say, there's really hardly anybody that makes it. Such a small percentage, less than 1%.
I mean, it's even, you have more access to people these days, and that's also why it's even harder to get to the top. There is no top, things are spread so thin these days because there is so much to consume. And ironically, I feel like some people, or anybody who watched this already, is like, why aren't they talking about the Seahawks training camp? Because
we'll get to that.
That's what is advertised here, is that you're going to listen to talk about Seahawks training camp. Yeah, the last thing I'll say about Twitter, my only advice was get off of Twitter for an entire NFL season. Don't be on Twitter for an entire NFL season, because most of the people out there who have tweeted about the Seahawks for the last 8-9 years don't know what it's like to live the life of a person who doesn't tweet about the Seahawks every day, or the NFL, or whatever it is. So you can't just take a break in February or June and think that you're taking a break from Twitter. You got to do it when you're actually addicted to the machine, and then actually find out what your life is like. Because I've had a pretty happy NFL writing career for 2 years without tweeting. You don't go away. You are wasting your creative energy on there, I think, if anything. So don't worry, don't stress. even as a fan out there, you could live an entire life without Twitter during the season. So my advice is, if you really want to know what it's like, give it a shot. Nothing bad will happen to you. But do actually ignore that advice and follow Seaside Joe News on Twitter. Because training camp is a week away, and I will be tweeting about the Seahawks all season long. So don't forget to ignore my advice as it pertains to Seaside Joe. The Seahawks enter training camp with a quarterback competition for the first time since 2012. And even though there could be comparisons made to that last time the Seahawks had a quarterback competition, the real comparison would probably be the 2011 Seattle Seahawks and the quarterback competition there between Tavares Jackson and Charlie Whitehurst, and the end of Matt Hasselbeck's time with the Seattle Seahawks. And we can say at this point, the Seahawks are in that similar position where you've got Tavares Jackson and Charlie Whitehurst, except now it's Geno Smith and Drew Lock. They're very different players from those players, but for the most part, you do know what you're getting with both. Geno Smith, a 2013 draftee, Drew Lock, 2019. One of them, a gunslinger, can throw deep, has a lot of interceptions. The other, not a gunslinger, brought a knife to the gunfight, I guess, and but is a lot more reliable, perhaps, in protecting the football, has been around the team and the offense for several years. Geno Smith is going to be I wouldn't even say, because I think safer bet is almost a misnomer. It's a misleading, to say that Geno Smith is a safer bet, because there's no safety here. The Seahawks are going with a bad option at quarterback. Maybe one of them will surprise, but as we sit here in July, it's a bad choice. It's one of the bad choices of all the 32 teams. So I'm expecting Drew Lock to be the quarterback. I think that the Seahawks are saying what they need to say. They believe that, they go in. It's nothing that Pete Carroll said is untrue. Geno Smith is he's ahead of Drew Lock in terms of being familiar with the offense, being familiar with the team. He is ahead of Drew Lock, but nobody here, I think, is rooting for Geno Smith to be the starting quarterback. Maybe you're not rooting for Drew Lock either, but I don't know. I would like to. It would be a great story for Geno Smith to start and do something in a Josh McCown sense that leads to him getting another starting opportunity somewhere in 2023. But I think that the only chance of having some exciting football offensively this season, which most football comes down to, people like to see quarterbacks throw the ball and have deep touchdowns. I mean, that is it's as old as football itself, the forward pass, and it still remains true. You look at Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes. You look at some of the games that people call the greatest games of all time, 54-51, Rams versus Chiefs. It's like they all watch those games. They love those games. Drew Lock might have a game like that. Geno Smith won't have any games like that. Dad, are you rooting for Geno Smith? Am I wrong?
I love Geno Smith.
Are you rooting for Geno Smith to be the starting quarterback?
Yes, I am. I definitely am. I mean, I think he's going to be the starting. I think Geno's going to be the starting quarterback at least the first 5 or 6 games, just because of familiarity, because of how much he's worked for it,
But what about week 1 versus the Denver Broncos? Who would be more familiar with the Denver Broncos than Drew Lock? I mean, he has an opportunity. He knows the tendencies maybe of the cornerbacks or this, that, and the other thing. If we're really getting down to it, I mean, Geno Smith is a guy that didn't get a lot of reps with the ones on the Seahawks. So playing with these guys, playing for, it is sort of, I don't think that he's that far ahead of Drew Lock.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that would be why I think he would have, at the very minimum, 5 or 6 games to show what he can do. And if he doesn't really show it, then definitely Drew Lock, or maybe even Jacob Eason. We still nobody's really touched on him, but I think he has a shot still too. If he can figure out what he needs to figure out. But I mean, I'm rooting for any one of them to be good. But I definitely think, as far as continuity is concerned, Drew Lock
Wouldn't
has.
it be? Don't you think it would behoove, you as a Seahawks fan more that Drew Lock was good though than if Geno Smith was good?
No, because in my opinion, I think you should always have at least one quarterback that's tradable on your roster, in terms of them being good enough to start and probably not getting enough starting time. I don't like the idea of having a backup quarterback that's just kind of an arm, like a warm body, So I think somebody that's got, if one of them emerges as a starter and the other one is still good or at least average or above average, then that's another trade chip in my mind.
I don't think that that's a possibility. I mean, you're saying that you want Drew Lock to lose the competition so that he can be a tradable asset.
Or Geno Smith.
I don't think the trade. I don't think this is a big factor for me. But with the Seahawks, we're talking about if Drew Lock is a good quarterback. I mean, even if Drew Lock is like good enough, like let's say that maybe there's a possibility that he has a season good enough to be a starter in the NFL, but the Seahawks still felt like, well, let's say they got a high draft pick from the Broncos and they said, you were pretty good. We also have this high draft pick. We want to draft Bryce Young and we want to franchise tag you, and then we'll trade you to a situation in which we will get some sort of compensation here because you've been franchise tagged. Geno Smith, that isn't a possibility. There is no possibility that Geno Smith will ever be traded for anything ever again in his life. I mean, so I do think, like, if you want Drew Lock to be tradable, I think this goes to my point. You want Drew Lock to be good more than you want Geno Smith to be good because, again, Drew Lock, you like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So Drew Lock is the guy that can pass them the ball if he ends up being able to, say, diagnose coverages better, gain confidence in some of the tight window throws that he needs to be able to make. That's where I think that it just behooves everybody more for Drew Lock to be the guy out of these two guys. And I think one of the most telling things that I've really discussed about the two quarterbacks is Geno Smith signed a 1-year contract worth up to $3.5 million. There wasn't a single team in the entire NFL that had seen Geno Smith's 3 starts last year and said, hey, we want you to come compete to be a starter here, except for the Seahawks. Not the Saints, not the Panthers, not even the Bears as a more thorough backup to Justin Fields, not any of these teams that need a quarterback right now, of which there are at least 10 probably. And if they cut him, they only owed him $500,000. There isn't another quarterback in the NFL that is deemed to be a starter that is anywhere near how low Geno Smith is being paid. Mitchell Trubisky got way more guaranteed money. There were 3 guys that I saw. Marcus Mariota got way more guaranteed money. All these guys signed 2-year deals. So Geno Smith, to me, they signed him. They said, you're not a starter anywhere in the NFL. You don't have anywhere else to go. We're going to give you a chance to, be better than Drew Lock. We don't think that necessarily will be. But if you are, you'll make $3.5 million. And I think with Drew Lock, you go, wow, we're about to trade Russell Wilson. They're offering us Drew Lock. Do we even like this guy? You watch the film for weeks. They watched the film for weeks probably. Missouri, all of this starts in Denver. And I think, you can start to convince yourself this is going to be the guy. This is a good prospect because he does have things that are good. Yeah. So I think it makes a lot more sense that Seattle's coaches were going, we really convinced ourselves that we can get the most out of Drew Lock. And we hope that that's what happens. Whereas with Geno Smith, it's just your insurance. Like, holy shit, like if Drew Lock is still really bad, at least we know that Geno Smith is alive.
Yeah, I mean, I think, But I think part of my observation is just, or my opinion about it has more to do with, I'll say this, maybe this is the same for you, but I think no matter what kind of season Drew Lock or Geno Smith have next year, I think they're going to draft a quarterback no matter what.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's in the first round, second round, or third round, I don't think they're going to go lower. Like for a starting caliber quarterback, they're not going to go lower than the third round. Probably not even the second round, considering how loaded it is. So I think part of what I'm saying is tempered by the fact that I think no matter what, they're going to draft another quarterback. You know what I mean?
There's no question. I don't have any faith in Drew Lock being a franchise quarterback. He is past that point in his career. But if either of them plays well enough next year, I mean, you would just think that Drew Lock is the guy that you say, hey, if Geno Smith, there's no way Geno Smith is passable. I just cannot see him ever spending 2 seasons in a row as the Seahawks starting quarterback, because we've seen enough of him at this point. He's been in the league for almost 10 years. Drew Lock possibly could be good enough for 2 years. So that's, again, where I think if Drew Lock has a decent season, then next year you give him the contract that Mitchell Trubisky just got, that Marcus Mariota just got, and you say, here's a 2-year, $20 million contract. Jameis Winston is the other guy. Here's a 2-year, $20 million contract. It's really good for the fact that you're not that great, but you're going to start up until we pull you for the guy that we just drafted. Yeah. So Drew Lock getting the starting job gives the Seahawks an actual chance to have a bridge quarterback next year. Whereas Geno Smith, there's just no road for Geno Smith as the starter in week 1 that doesn't lead to Drew Lock being the starter eventually. Because unless you cut Drew Lock after the training camp battle, there's just no way. There's just no way that he's going to go up against the AFC West, 6 games against the NFC West, an NFL schedule, and not have 2-3 games in a row that has every fan going, get Drew Lock into this game. There's just that's inevitable. Drew Lock as the starter in week 1, he could make it through the whole season, I think, because Geno Smith, there's not a lot. There will be people being like, yeah, and then Drew Lock will have a 3 interception game or whatever. By the way, this is an Seaside Joe exclusive. If this is my pledge, because I think Drew Lock is going to be the starter. And I was thinking about this the other day. For every touchdown pass that Drew Lock throws this season, I'm going to run 5 miles that week. So if Drew Lock has a touchdown pass, then I have to run 5 miles, that Tuesday or whatever. If he has 2 touchdown passes, I have to run 10 miles on Tuesday. And if he has 3 touchdown passes, I have to run a half marathon.
Are you prepped for that? You ready for that?
I've been training for a couple of years. I'm ready to go, but I don't know, because if he becomes Kurt Warner, I'm gonna either be really, screwed or really in shape. One of those two things. And he is capable of maybe a 3 touchdown game. I don't know if that's the thing. He's never had Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. I'm not like some really big optimism guy here. I don't think that I don't want to get trapped in these traps of people who go like, Drew Lock's going to be great. Like, he is what he is. He's done it. He's shown us enough through 3 seasons to know that, like, if he becomes Ryan Tannehill, Ryan Tannehill had like 6 decent years with the Dolphins before he went to the Titans. He's not a young guy. Like, there was plenty to like about that. Like, he was in this. Drew Lock was the worst quarterback in the NFL over the last 2 years. Anybody that has had as many snaps as he has, he's about the worst. But at the same time, I'm thinking, if DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are healthy, if Charles Cross is like a really great, like Rashawn Slater type week 1 tackle, you just might get 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, just because those guys are going to get open. Those guys are going to make plays. There's something there. and Drew Lock is, he's got a deep pass that is rare. Whereas Geno Smith, I wrote it in the newsletter this morning. Maybe he's good for 3 deep attempts a game, and you're just kind of like you're just kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that they get completed. Like, that DK Metcalf makes a play, that a cornerback falls down, that an assignment is missed, because that's just not Geno Smith's game, And I think he's managed to stay in the NFL for 8 years because he's a really good backup quarterback. He's probably very good in the meeting rooms, probably very good helping the starter prepare, probably very good teammate, all those things that wouldn't keep you in the NFL for this long when you're not really a starter. So that's the other thing, though, is I think Jimmy Garoppolo is a scenario that a lot of people are now moving on to because Baker Mayfield has been traded. And I'll tell you why I don't think that he'll end up on the Seahawks. And it's not necessarily because the Seahawks wouldn't take him. But first, why don't you tell me your thoughts on Jimmy Garoppolo and maybe even that whole situation with the 49ers, because it really is fascinating to see this particular scenario play out where you've got a quarterback that has not done anything on the field, but then another one who nobody's really satisfied with.
Nobody's satisfied with, but still got you some decent results, right? It's tough. I really don't think that like the assessment of quarterbacks is the best discourse. I don't really think you need Michael Jordan at quarterback to win. I think you need somebody that works well with his teammates, understands the system, and then anything else is cherry on top, right? Like Josh Allen is a good example of somebody who figured out the Buffalo system last year as opposed to his previous years. And not only did he figure out, a good working relationship with his coach, but with his teammates, and then his talent took him to another level, right? So Jimmy has the knowledge of how to run that offense in San Francisco. He understands. He's a good teammate. He understands the balance between the running game and the passing game. He just doesn't have the same kind of physical traits, the same abilities as other quarterbacks. And that's where I don't think he'd be I don't want him on the Seahawks. This draft is too important. I know multiple people have brought up like, well, you wouldn't need to trade more than like a 4th or 5th round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo. But in my mind, I immediately start thinking of there's so many things. There's so many, not necessarily holes on the team. There are holes, but there's so many unproven aspects to this team that trading even a 4th or 5th round pick would just seem counterintuitive to what.
I think it's also just a moot point. Jimmy Garoppolo being traded to the Seahawks from the 49ers just seems it's just not ever going to happen, right?
It's not going to happen. And what are you doing? You're getting Geno Smith. You're getting whatever. You're not getting anything more than you already have, so.
Well, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is better than Geno Smith, but I also think he's better than Drew Lock, but I also think that better, it's hard to get around these two facts. One fact is Pete Carroll is not tanking. He does not believe that the Seahawks are going to miss the playoffs. It is fine to disagree with him. It is fine to think that is the wrong strategy because the Seahawks aren't going to make the Super Bowl. But Pete Carroll is 100% convinced that the Seahawks are going to make the playoffs this year. I'm sure of that. It's who he is. He took the 2010 Seahawks to the playoffs. No matter how it happened, it happened. And he's still in this mindset that you never lose. You never, ever, ever lose. So it's just who Pete Carroll is. So he thinks that the Seahawks are going to make the playoffs. And another point to that is, why else would you trade for Shelby Harris and Noah Fant, because when at the end of the day, when the Seahawks were negotiating a Russell Wilson trade, I'm sure that Pete Carroll said, we're not trading this guy for picks, because we are trading him for picks, but we also need players who are going to help us right now, because you're taking away our best player. We need veterans helping us now. So give us Shelby Harris for one, because we need that to shore up that side of the defensive line, because we hate LJ Collier. And then give us Noah Fant two, because we don't want to develop a tight end. We need a tight end ready to go right now who can catch passes. And give us Drew Lock three, because we don't have any other avenue towards a quarterback. So give us that guy, because we think maybe there's something left in him for this one season. And, it's pretty clear to me that Pete Carroll, with re-signing Al Woods and bringing back Quentin Jefferson and re-signing Quandre Diggs and not trading Tyler Lockett when they probably could have traded Tyler Lockett for at least a second-round pick and saved money and all that kind of stuff, Pete Carroll thinks he's going to win. So that's number one. Yeah. But the fact that sucks about that, or it kind of ruins it, is Seahawks aren't good. With everything that they've got, they're good enough to, overachieve. But I don't think that there's any chance of them being the Cincinnati Bengals. There's no chance to me in this mind of, the Seahawks are going to go from 7-10 to the Super Bowl the year after they replace Russell Wilson with Drew Lock or Geno Smith. Just doesn't really compute to me. This isn't the Mariners subtracting Alex Rodriguez. I think that this is a different sport, a different situation. There's no Ichiro maybe here, but no. I think that for the most part, the Seahawks are just in that middle of the road, where even if you made an upgrade at quarterback, which I think Jimmy Garoppolo is like the 24th best quarterback in the NFL, and the Seahawks will be starting the 33rd best quarterback in the NFL. You're not getting over any humps. So you try and win the most you can, but at the end of the day, it's just never going to be enough this time around. In my opinion, there's no Super Bowl. Do you think the Seahawks could reach the Super Bowl?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I knew you would say, because you're a very optimistic guy.
I'm optimistic, but I'm also optimistic for good reason with the defense. We're not coming. If our defense is good enough.
That's an extreme amount of optimism, given that the Seahawks, they had one of the worst pass rushing units in the NFL last season. They haven't really done anything other than sign Uchenna Nwosu to increase the likelihood of that. I know that, even in the best case scenario, Uchenna Nwosu is a 10-sack player, and to think that the Seahawks would go from 7-10 to the Super Bowl.
Well,
when they don't have a pass rush, when they don't have any cornerbacks, when they don't, there is, let's say, to what degree do you think that is possible?
Because there's an extra playoff.
To what degree? 5%, 1%, 20%?
I would say a 1 in 25 chance. 1 in 28. 1 in 28. 1 in 28.
Yeah, that's probably around the same. That's probably around the bottom of the league.
But Kenny, when I'm saying that too, I'm also keeping in mind that the second half defense the last 2 years was top 5, top 7, and the run game last year absolutely broke through. And you're going to have an offense that's dictated less on improvisation and much more on getting to the plays that Carroll and Dickerson and Waldron want to have called, right? So that's where my optimism keeps coming up. It's because we have shown, we have the talent. Like Russell Wilson's first half last year and first half the year before proves that when Russell Wilson focuses on, the majority of his plays are focused on getting the ball to the spots that his receivers want the ball so they can get yards after catch. When you focus on a good play action and when you have a good balanced offense. Yes, centered around passing to some extent, but we have the talent, right? We have the talent.
I mean, if we're going down line by line, the other NFC teams, Geno Smith versus Aaron Rodgers, you're comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable. Look how bad Aaron Rodgers did in the playoffs. When
Geno
he's
Smith versus Aaron Rodgers, you're comfortable with that. You think that's fine. That's a heads-up match.
In the playoffs?
Anytime.
Well, they're not playing this year in the regular season, but if they played in the playoffs.
I know, but yeah, so in the playoffs, but at the end of the day,
regular season Aaron Rodgers is different than postseason Aaron Rodgers. Postseason Aaron Rodgers is a mess.
So Geno Smith versus Aaron Rodgers in the NFC Championship, you like Geno Smith in that game?
Well, I like Geno Smith because I have no choice. That's who's playing. That's my team.
I know you have no choice, but you have no choice. That you have. It seems like you don't want to say that you'll support Geno Smith being better than Aaron Rodgers in a playoff
game. Geno hasn't had a full season. If he's
Geno Smith versus Tom Brady in the playoffs, you like Geno Smith in that game?
Heads up? No.
Sure.
No.
Geno Smith versus Matthew Stafford. Obviously, I don't know, you're thinking Matthew Stafford throws a couple picks. Geno Smith doesn't.
I'm fine with Stafford versus Smith because Stafford now is much more conservative quarterback than he used to be, which would be ideally what I'd like to see Geno Smith be, which would be like a super Jared Goff. You know what I mean? Like Jared Goff elevated is what I'm hoping for Geno Smith, which is what I'm talking about. Like, Aaron Rodgers can be very dynamic, but he literally has been terrible in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like really not good.
Let's just say that the Packers have Jair Alexander at cornerback. Some would say the best cornerback in the NFL. The Seahawks' number one cornerback is Sidney Jones, followed by Artie Burns and Justin Coleman. The Packers have Kenny Clark, maybe the best defensive tackle after Aaron Donald. That maybe the Seahawks have, Al Woods and Poona Ford. They're nice players. The Packers have Rashawn Gary, had 12 and a half sacks last season, one of the better up-and-coming pass rushers in the NFL.
Yeah.
More proven at this point than Darrell Taylor. I definitely hope that Darrell Taylor, gets to that point, or Boy Mafe gets to that point. He's been compared to Rashawn Gary. I could keep going down the list. I mean, the Packers have all pros.
Yeah.
I've heard really high things on Devondre Campbell as one of the best linebackers in the NFL. All the talent that the Packers have, even after trading Devontae Adams. You want to get on their offensive line with Elton Jenkins and, some of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, maybe David Bakhtiari if he's ready for week 1. And it's just to not just start at Aaron Rodgers, but to look at the entire Packers roster and say that in the Seahawks' best case scenario, in 2 years, they'll look like the Packers look like right now in their best case scenario.
Best case.
And I'm just saying right now, for the Seahawks to get to the Super Bowl without even keeping in mind that when they get there, they have to beat Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Justin Herbert or whatever it is. The Seahawks are entering the season with Drew Lock and Geno Smith against a cachet of NFC quarterbacks that isn't even that strong, relatively speaking, to some of the past years when they had Russell Wilson in the conference and when they had all these other players. But it's like, it's going to be the story of the century if Geno Smith wins a Super Bowl in this year, when he got past Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and Matthew Stafford and Kyler Murray and Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins. And I don't even think that all these guys are all that great. And then look at this, even taking a team like the Saints. Like if you wanted to take a team that doesn't have a good quarterback, but might have a shot at winning the Super Bowl as a surprise team, well, that team's got Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara coming back this year. I think Kamara might be suspended for a part of the season. But they've got this really strong offensive line. They've got Marshawn Lattimore, and they added Tyrann Mathieu, and they've got Cam Jordan. It's just looking back on the 2013, 2014, 2015 era Seahawks and going, yeah, if you were sitting there in 2013 You're the Detroit Lions. How could you possibly think that you can compete with a team that has Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, Chris Clemens, Bobby Wagner, Russell Wilson, Doug Baldwin, Russell Okung, Max Unger, over and over, Marshawn Lynch, over and over and over again, because that was a talented team that was unbelievable and undeniable and had a bunch of guys going to the All-Pro and the Pro Bowls. The 2022 Seahawks aren't apparently there unless it is one of the most surprising seasons in NFL history. I mean, that's what I think, at least.
I mean, but we have continuity, though, right? We have an underperforming scheme that didn't work the last 3 years that might work. If the scheme works, it doesn't mean they're going to win the Super Bowl, but
that's what I just asked you.
No, but you said that this is why I think they're going to, if you don't make the Super Bowl, you're going to have a good year. There's an even better chance that you're going to have a good year. And that's why I think it's not the surprise of the century. I think the Lions going to the Super Bowl is like rolling snake eyes because they have decades and decades of ineptitude in the front office, decades of drafting the wrong player, decades of letting players go for nothing, like Quandre Diggs, is a great example. Decades of underutilizing, even Matthew Stafford, underutilizing him, like obviously Matthew Stafford's a good quarterback, but really, if you really, really think about it and you really want to put somebody's feet to the fire and talk about quarterback play, quarterbacks that have arm talent, quarterbacks that can throw the ball hard, that can scramble, blah, blah, blah. In a vacuum, none of those traits actually win you the Super Bowl. They really don't. The traits that win you the Super Bowl are accuracy, clock management, scheme management, and your defense, whether they're good or bad. The Rams defense during the 99 team, like the greatest show on turf, the defense was they were really solid, but they were and they would give up points. Some of that was because the Rams offense scored, but also the biggest thing with them was third down, right? They were really, really good on third down. So that's, again, where in football, I think this is why it's exciting. I think that's why this season's really exciting.
I agree.
It is a team sport like none other, right? Like baseball teams can come out of nowhere because one or two pitchers start to figure shit out, because the closer has an elite season, because one or two guys bats over their career batting average. Next thing you know, you've won 80 or 90 games. Football is that team-generated element, so that's why I have had that optimism that if all goes right, all Gino has to do, if the offensive line is better, if you have a bunch of young players on the offensive line that are not only up and coming, but then they have the extra motivation.
Isn't it okay to just say that the Seahawks can be bad this year without it being a negative? Like, isn't it just fine to be like, look, the Seahawks are in a position right now where they don't need to win 10 games or 8 games to be considered successful.
Right.
They've just put these players in place. And I don't even think that there needs to be any pressure on Geno Smith or Drew Lock to even be considered, to be talked about in a positive light. Like, what if there's no reason to worry about, like, the Seahawks are not ready. They're just not ready. Charles Cross, NFL debut, your left tackle, and maybe your best offensive lineman. And that's fine. The fact that Aaron Donald will get to face off against Austin Blythe, probably a person he abused in Rams practice over and over again, which is why he's not on the Rams again. The fact that, it's really not even going to be a challenge for off defenses to get around this offensive line in certain situations. It may be really difficult to run through the offensive line because the Seahawks don't have a quarterback who can threaten and stretch out the defense and threaten at the back end of a defense. So it's going to be even more pressure on Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny to create yards after contact and be a Marshawn Lynch. The Seahawks' only thing that they need to be is the best version of themselves that they can be, which in 2011 was 7-9, showed a little juice in the second half of the season. Things got going a little bit okay with Tavares Jackson. They almost, if they hadn't lost their last 2 games of the season, they could have been a winning team. And that's about the best that you could hope for with Tavares Jackson. So, I guess just my point being that, yeah, Geno Smith isn't good. That's fine. That's not a thing that there's no defense of him necessary. Because there's no reason to be optimistic. There's only a reason to be agnostic. That's the only room that there is for anything with Geno Smith or Drew Lock, is to say, well, I'm agnostic. I don't know. He's never been in this position before. I have no reason to say that he'll do good, because that's illogical, but I can't say that he'll definitely be bad. That's the best case scenario. Whereas with Jimmy Garoppolo, I think that as bad as he is in those situations that the Seahawks will not be in, which is going into the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl, he's at least a guy who proved that he could get the ball to Deebo Samuel and George Kittle in positions that would allow them to then create yards after the catch, which is maybe what DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are going to have to do this season. And the defense just isn't very talented yet, and that's okay. That's what the Seahawks would like to be in a couple of years. They're building around Darrell Taylor, Boy Mafe, Kobe Bryant, these 2 safeties, and Jordan Brooks and Darrell Taylor, and just saying like, hey, maybe next year we'll sign Danielle Hunter and do something, and because it'll be a more attractive situation, like Chandler Jones going to the Raiders this year, where it's just like, I think as long as you show positivity, because, then people will go, great, let's join the Seahawks, because they're on the come up, just like they were. Pete Carroll's proven he can before.
Yeah, that's the exciting part of this season, Kenny. I think that's where the whole like the first time in forever, right? Like we were talking about off air before we got on, about Twitter and such. Like, I think especially now, I would say that some of your popularity, or anybody's popularity that blogs or writes about the Seahawks, this is an opportunity for your unique voice, you in particular, but anybody's unique voice, to be heard in a quieter room, because really we have a bunch of people kind of wondering and like looking at the floor and being like, yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen. Whereas the last 10 years, there was not only an expectation of what was going to happen, but there really wasn't, Russell Wilson, as great a quarterback as he is, he really wasn't that dynamic in the concept of like a Tom Brady or even an Aaron Rodgers, where, the front office, the coaching staff sort of spends like all offseason like crafting maybe not an entirely new offense, but they kind of come up with new wrinkles in the offense every year to compete. Whereas Russell Wilson, again, for as great as he was never that dynamic, and he was never very like willing to be that flexible. So
yeah,
what was there to talk about? It was really just sort of like, here's the pieces, here's what we've got, and let's hope it works. And I think at some point, like we saw it last year, there's a bit of apathy that happens, especially those last few games that Russell played, where like this is the team. Like, there's something cool maybe about Pete Carroll or the team being linear in some regards, like their philosophy, but at the same time, that doesn't help overall. And now you're going to see like new ideas, new opinions coming out about the Seahawks. Hot takes being recognized, some of your takes being recognized, because now we're saying now we're going to like we're going to see like what we're all about,
There's definitely that aspect now to the quarterback position that for the whole offseason, the position is moldable by the coaches, and it'll just be, hey, you're not going to tell us what to do. We're going to tell you what to do, and then you're going to execute it, and there's not really going to be a discussion about it. And then it'll really be up to Shane Waldron and Pete Carroll and the offensive coaching staff to be successful within knowing that they have what they have and that this is it. You are getting by with either Geno Smith or Drew Lock. And that's another reason why they're just so different as quarterbacks that you would have to think that they make a decision early in camp, because I mean, relatively early, right? They have to have a real competition, but at a certain point, you just got to start going. We need to start installing the offense we're going to run in September, because we're going to run a totally different scheme with Drew Lock than we are with Geno Smith. There is that aspect to running the football probably as much as they would like to, but ultimately, if the Seahawks find themselves to be a bad team, then they will have to. They may not get to run the football as much as they would like to. It's a thing where you run the football if you're doing well, and if in the second half, because when they go up against the Denver Broncos in Week 1 on Monday Night Football, talking about a team that will be facing Russell Wilson, a Russell Wilson that is all about the perception of Russell Wilson. Monday Night Football, the world, the country is watching you. They're going to make fun of you if you suck against the Seahawks. They're going to make fun of the Seahawks if you beat their asses. So both sides are kind of motivated in that way. And we know that at least maybe on Russell Wilson's side, they have a few more proven veterans, I guess you could say. But I don't really know if I really think the Broncos are all that good. But there will be that motivation for the Broncos to win. And let's say that the Broncos are leading 20-3 in the second half. Now it's totally up to the quarterback to go out there and win the game. You're not going to be able to run the football that well. That's where I think fans definitely do not want to see a tank type season if you're a Seahawks fan, because I just know that from past experiences, people just check out. They won't actually be watching the games. They won't actually be following, because Seahawks fans may have forgotten this after 10 years of Russell Wilson. Bad football is hard to watch. It's just like the Mariners for all those years. Bad baseball is hard to watch 162 times a year. And bad football is hard to watch even 16 times or 17 times a year. So there is that aspect of wanting the Seahawks to be better. This is the last thing I'll say about why I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo will be traded to the Seahawks. Well, I know that he won't be traded. I'm pretty sure he won't be traded to the Seahawks, so the 49ers don't want him on the Seahawks. But I also don't think that the 49ers will cut Jimmy Garoppolo. He's at $25 million, but they save all the money if they cut him. But the problem, the thing for Jimmy Garoppolo is he wants to avoid being cut, because if he gets cut, he doesn't get any money until he signs his next contract.
Yeah.
Well, what's he going to get when he's a free agent in August? If the 49ers cut Jimmy Garoppolo and he becomes a free agent, he goes talks to the Texans. He goes and he talks to the Panthers. He goes and he talks to the Browns. He goes and he talks to the Falcons. He goes and he talks to these teams, and they're going, we spent all our money, and we think you're desperate. We'll give you $2 million. So Jimmy Garoppolo needs the 49ers to find him a trade partner that's going to say, we'll take you on. You need to take a pay cut. You're not going to make $25 million here, obviously, but, we'll give you a contract for $7 million. And so the 49ers need to go out there, and they're probably already doing this, talking to every team possible other than the Seahawks and saying, what are you willing to pay him? And then the trade compensation is just a secondary conversation where they go, okay, Jimmy has agreed to play for you for $7.5 million. He's agreed. We will, maybe the 49ers will pay $3.5 million. Do something. I don't know if there's anything there. And then they go, will you give us a 4th round pick? And they'll go, are you kidding? No. And so then they trade him for a conditional 6th or conditional 5th round pick. And I think that's ultimately what happens with Jimmy Garoppolo, because, as I said, it's in Garoppolo's best interest to avoid being cut and to accept the team that right now will be willing to pay him, whether that's maybe the Houston Texans or something like that, will be willing to pay him the most amount of money. Jimmy Garoppolo, if he was a free agent, if he just gets cut, there is no other team to go to other than the Seahawks. I think every other team would be a dead end for Garoppolo, because, the Falcons are going with Mariota, and even if they weren't, they have a terrible offense. You have Kyle Pitts, you have Drake London, but it's just the worst offense, and it's just going to be a bad team. And the Seahawks are going to, like I've already said, I don't think the Seahawks are going to be great, but you've got Metcalf, Lockett, you've got a team that's had some success recently, you've got a head coach who's had success, you've got a situation that you're better than the two quarterbacks, or at least you've proven more in the last 5 years than either of them have. You're going to be able to maybe step in, like you said, getting Drew Lock primed up. I think Drew Lock, if he's going to be ready, he's going to be ready in week 1. Jimmy Garoppolo, if you add him at this point, probably, especially because I don't think he'll be back from shoulder surgery until the middle of August. That's a guy who's like, oh, well, I can take over maybe in the middle of the season and get myself going to be a free agent next year and to actually get another contract and a chance to start somewhere. So I think if Jimmy Garoppolo were released, he'd go directly to the Seahawks. The Texans are just too bad of a situation. The Browns, unless Deshaun Watson is suspended for the entire year, Jimmy Garoppolo would be going to a team that he knows is inevitably going to bench him. And so the Seahawks are the only team. So that's why I think the 49ers, to avoid that and to try and recoup anything at all, will work diligently to trade Jimmy Garoppolo based on a pay cut. And that could be to any number of those teams that I just said wouldn't sign him because so many other jobs have been taken. So that's what I think happens. And I think that Drew Lock, obviously I said I think that the team wants him to be the starter, that he will eventually win that job. I think the receivers want him to be the starter secretly, because I just would assume that once they get through some practices, they're like, what receiver doesn't like to go deep? I don't know, but it's this tricky situation. And let's talk about some of these other things that I've talked about in the newsletter because, hey, I do have optimistic things to say. There are positive things there. Did you read the newsletter yet today?
I scanned it.
And, make sure to get on that because
I have it up right here.
Sent it out just before. So I'll share my screen of the Seahawks roster. And this is from ourlads.com. By the way, I wanted to highlight this comment from Eric Newcomer because I wanted to reiterate. Laps for Lock is my pledge for the Seahawks season. It's laps for Lock. 5 miles for every touchdown pass thrown by Drew Lock this season, and that's in a single day. I've never run a half marathon before. I haven't quite gotten there yet, but if he throws 3 touchdowns in a single game, I'm going to have to do it. If he throws 5 touchdowns in a single game, I'll have to run my first marathon, which I don't know how that's going to be possible.
How about, Kenny, how about like if he throws 5 touchdowns and 2 picks, then you only have to run 15 miles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there is that pick. Yeah, if I could subtract some picks there somehow, because if he does 2 touchdowns, I want to run that 10 miles. Even if he throws 3 interceptions, I want to show everyone my commitment to Drew Lock.
Right.
But I think it's something that will help motivate Drew Lock, help motivate me to run more because I've been trying to get up to a marathon. So it's going to work out for both of us. Well, my first prediction in the newsletter today was just that Drew Lock, about a week into camp or through the first week in camp, I think we're going to hear a lot of positive statements about Drew Lock, that he's ahead of schedule, that he's picking up the offense really fast, that the team really follows his lead, that he's doing all the right things. They're not going to say anything negative about Geno Smith. They may say the same things like, oh, I like both of these guys. But I think most likely, that first first preseason game, it's really hard to tell how much that they would even play either of those guys because, it might just be more of a Jacob Eason opportunity. And once you're talking about that first preseason game, maybe Drew Lock. The thing is, it's in such a unique situation for Geno Smith that you would think, let him start the first game, even if it's for a series, just because he's never been the one, or at least he hasn't been the one since early on in his career with the Jets. So it's like, as a symbol, you start Geno Smith. But ultimately, I think we'll know within the first couple of preseason games who's in the real lead here. And I just think that the positive comments will be effusive for Drew Lock. Talked enough about the quarterback situation.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else you want to add to it, we can just move on to another thing.
No, I'm excited. I'm down to talk about. Although, come on now, you got to give Gino a little credit. You posted that tweet of his. Man, he's looking ripped, bro. He's looking good.
Hey,
come
listen,
on.
I'm a nice guy. I'm not a mean guy, and I want Geno Smith. I'm always rooting for players to do well. So it's all there. It's all good. At the end of the day, it's not as though Geno Smith didn't play at all last year. We saw 3 games, and I know that people can go like, "Well, he beat the Jaguars, and it was a blowout." And the Seahawks almost beat the Saints, and they almost did okay against the Steelers. At the end of the day, he got outdueled by Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, like, not even like saying like, I don't want to make it sound that way. At the end of the day, he wasn't good against the Steelers and the Saints. And if you take out, as I wrote in the article as well, I'm just remembering it now. If you take out that 184-yard touchdown pass to DK Metcalf, he averaged 2 yards per pass attempt. So, and that touchdown pass, the quarterback fell down, the safety missed the tackle. I mean, credit to DK Metcalf for making a play, credit for Geno Smith to making the throw. That's fine. But what it could have been, what it should have been, what it might have been, would have been, a 17-yard completion, which is fine, which is good, which is great. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you take away one play. He had 21 other passes. He was sacked 5 times, and the total net yards was 45. So, and I like the Saints defense, but the Seahawks are going to play other teams with as good or better defenses than the Saints. So the concerns there are that we did see Geno Smith last year. The Jaguars aren't a real team. It is what it is. I hope that he does well. I would be interested to see, a great comeback season. We're like, oh man, that's cool. Like that movie, The Rookie, with Kevin Costner or whatever, where there's some, it's like the old guy playing baseball and he does well or something.
Dennis Quaid,
thank you.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner, he just tries to sneak into every sports movie that he can.
He is, yeah, he does.
And I don't think that, Drew Lock is going to change anybody's minds about the draft next year.
No, I don't think either one. I think that's where you and I are in agreement 100%. Like, yeah, short of either one of them literally becoming an all-pro next year, even that, I don't think, Kenny, I think they would still draft a quarterback, even if one of them was an all-pro, honestly.
Reflect the Sun, I was talking about wearing. I was thinking about adding a helmet with a GoPro on my run just to document. Yes, I'm actually doing this and
live stream it.
Something like that. I don't really know how all that stuff works, but I do have a GoPro, so we'll see how that turns out. So yeah, we'll see what happens at the quarterback position, the running back position.
Running back, baby.
This is very for Rashad Penny. The stories can circle around the fact that he'll probably be in great shape if he is like on the field. That we don't want to hear anything negative about hamstrings and all that kind of stuff and working out on the side and being on an exercise bike. We don't want to hear any of that. So as long as that's not the case, it'll be, this is the best shape of his life. He's ready to take over. Everything that happened at the end of last season will continue at the beginning of this season. And that'll be the Rashad Penny story. But I still think the end of camp, during camp, in the preseason, Kenneth Walker will be in the spotlight, the star of training camp. Kenneth Walker will be the guy that is making people go, wow, this guy is so good. This is exciting to have a player like this. He's really turning heads. I don't know how to tackle him. All that kind of stuff, where I think this could really be the Kenneth Walker show. Although I do think Rashad Penny there will be a lot of optimism. And unfortunately, it's hard to get our hopes up that Chris Carson will be a part of training camp. It'd be great if it happens. But ultimately, I think this is the Kenneth Walker type. This is going to be the Kenneth Walker season.
Yeah, I honestly think it's going to be the Kenneth Walker, DJ Dallas season. I think third down is going to be any kind of success on this team, we're going to have to produce better on third down than we have the last several years. And I think that third down back position is going to be really important. And I think I've seen a lot of good things with DJ, and I think he's going to really show himself next year. Yeah, and I really do think how much of the last 6 or 7 games last year, Kenny, do you think was a mirage? Like, how much of it's going to carry over and how much of it is going to stay in 2021?
Okay, some of it is a mirage. Some of it is, I mean, we're talking about if Rashad Penny did what he did for a full season, 2,000 rushing yards, everything that you could have ever hoped for. I think there's a little bit of trying to cut out my ums there. I think there's a little bit of that element that when I watched Rashad Penny, some of his best games last year, including against the Lions, I wasn't necessarily blown away. I thought that the offensive line did a great job. I thought the blocking was really great. That's something to be optimistic about.
Right.
If Waldron's blocking scheme and if the offensive linemen, which there will be turnover this year at both tackle spots and potentially at guard and definitely at center, there's so many different moving elements. But I do think there can be optimism about the blocking. With Rashad Penny specifically, I thought that he was great. I think that he had a lot of talent coming into the NFL. Don't see why that would necessarily be different if he feels good now. And so there are things to be optimistic about. I wouldn't say necessarily that I was the most impressed or as impressed as I thought that I would be going back and watching some of those games. And that is not to say that Rashad Penny can't be a top-of-the-line NFL running back. But in terms of a mirage, when he had 600 yards or whatever it was in 5 games, I mean, that's such a high bar. That's such a high expectation. I don't know if I'm necessarily thinking that Rashad Penny is on the level of a Jonathan Taylor at this point. And I think that you always have to be cautious with Rashad Penny because he had 3.5 years without anything really to be excited about other than, yes, he would have a good play or a nice series or something like that, and you could feel good about it. But you always have to worry that he's not going to be healthy, that he's not going to be on the field, that he's going to, lose yards on a play or something like that. I just think that's why I would be pretty optimistic. And again, I just think without that threat of a quarterback back there like Russell Wilson, who can take the top off of defense, who can break your heart if you pull out the wrong decision and coverage and everything like that. It will require more of a Marshawn Lynch style to gain those yards on the ground, which when I watch Kenneth Walker, I see those video game joystick moves, the stop-start ability, the anticipation, the burst, the vision, I call it a dance revolution style. It seems like the way that he moves his feet in a little box to confuse and beat anybody across from him is so exciting, better than almost anyone else at the college level last year, if not everybody. I think that the fact that it translated from Wake Forest in a different offense to Michigan State in an offense that would allow Walker to thrive as opposed to in the Wake Forest slow mesh offense, Kenneth Walker was the best player on the team, but would only get 10 or 12 carries in a game as opposed to Michigan State, where he's the lead back in an offense that is asking of a lead back to sometimes put up 200 yards. And he was doing it. He was taking those yards. He was creating those yards. He was taking advantage of it. He's so fast. He's so agile. He's so quick with his feet. He's so smart. He's got this high football IQ. He makes great decisions, so that's where I would expect also that Walker, Penny, if you had to make a bet who would have the most rushing yards this year, I know that Rashad Penny would be the favorite, but Walker's odds might be higher than most people expect right now because Rashad Penny, outside of half of one season, we haven't seen that type of production. Kenneth Walker, if he had 700 yards this year, which would be more than Penny I think's ever had, it wouldn't be that stunning, if Kenneth Walker came out there and had that kind of season. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, both out there together. And like I said, if there was any chance of Chris Carson being involved with DJ Dallas or whatever, I just don't even know how that Fordham would exactly even
I don't
mesh
think
together.
Chris Carson's going to play this year. I just really
I just don't see how that could work.
I don't see how it's going to happen. And if you're talking about, if you want to revisit my odds on the Seahawks winning the Super Bowl at 1-28, I mean, I think there's a 1 in 50 chance, maybe 1 in 100 that Rashad Penny has, starts in 15 games this year. I mean, he's just not going to do it, and even last year, he needed Adrian Peterson to literally say, yo, you have to play with pain, like you can't, like Rashad Penny to me is somewhere in between what CJ Prosise and Chris Carson, where it's like CJ Prosise chose lots of times to just not play, my hamstring hurts or my ankle's hurt, I'm out, he made that choice. And then Chris Carson plays so physical that, that contributes to his injuries as well as his propensity to get injured. But, I just don't see Penny. So I think absolutely Kenneth Walker. I think Kenneth Walker is probably going to have closer to 800 yards this year. But I see that as being a positive thing in the sense that I think that if Penny starts like 8 or 9 games, I bet you if everything works out, he'll have 600, 700 yards, and then Kenneth Walker does the rest, and he'll have maybe 8 or 9. Who knows? But like you said, those improvements on the offensive line, some of it was a mirage, but also I think some of it will carry over. I'm hoping some of it will carry over.
And I mean, also it's like I have to, again, there's a lot of better run defenses than the Detroit Lions. Some of these teams weren't necessarily, and a lot of teams aren't built to stop the run these days. So it could be beneficial to that regard for Seattle to steal a few explosive runs this season. So, few teams are maybe better set up for their running backs outside of that quarterback deficiency. So we'll see what happens there. But another guy that I wanted to highlight for being in the best shape of his life or stories around that would be Jamal Adams. He's a guy who had high expectations coming into the NFL as the number 6 pick, had high expectations being traded to the Seahawks for, 2 first-round picks. Definitely the expectation was that this is the type of player who, I mean, if Minka Fitzpatrick was traded for 1 first-round pick, then Jamal Adams must be even that much better. So that wasn't what the Seahawks have received. And so there was also just the problem of the amount of games that he has played in, which is 12 during his 2 seasons with the Seahawks. And then he had missed 2 games the year before. So there is that worry with Jamal Adams and his ability to just be available every week, which is not what you expected to be the biggest concern with Jamal Adams, given that he also just doesn't really create those splash plays. To be able to even know what the value is of Jamal Adams is so difficult because one season he's got 10 sacks. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, sacks are good. That's cool. And then the next year, he's got 0 sacks. And then he'd be out there playing coverage, and people go, well, yeah, but quarterbacks aren't really that afraid to throw at Jamal Adams. And, Minka Fitzpatrick intercepts a bunch of passes. Jamal Adams doesn't intercept passes. So you want him to be out there. You want him to be healthy. He talks like he's in the Hall of Fame already. You just want to see him, Jalen Ramsey is a great example of a guy who talks a lot and makes a big point about how he's the best. And then you kind of have to agree with him, which is like why you would even talk to that degree if you were that good. Jamal Adams, I think he's a positive influence. I think he's a good guy. I'm not saying anything negative about, maybe his personality. But to talk it, to sort of like kick your feet up and smoke a cigar and be like, I'm a great NFL safety. We want to see a Jamal Adams who's healthy and who is out there every week, kind of like 2-3 times during the game. Every fan is going, Jamal Adams is the best safety. I love Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams is so great. So, what are your sort of expectations of Jamal Adams right now?
I mean, it goes back to kind of like my nuanced position on a lot of this stuff. It's like he got schemed. He's a kind of dynamic player where the kind of dynamism that he displays is a unique kind of dynamism where basically he's one of the few players in the league that kind of openly not only wants to do more than your average safety, he's sort of asked to do more than your average safety, especially because he was on such a bad Jets team. Like if a guy, shows up, if he was on the Patriots, I don't think it'd be the same expectation because Bill Belichick has a really specific role for every player. Granted, I think he would put him in a position to be a very good player, and he would put him in the right position to still be a dynamic player. But the Seahawks are the kind of team that wants to sort of go outside the box. And I think that my expectation for him, like he's not going to be he's just not a very good safety when he's asked to do one thing or the other. Although I think some of his stats that you displayed, like, yeah, he gets thrown on and he kind of has gotten picked apart sometimes, but also some of that is misleading because of the way that we ran our defense. So I think if we run our defense in a more dynamic way, we'll use him in a more dynamic way. And that's the expectation, it seems like, from the coaching staff.
Well,
he's going to be more dynamic this year.
That's definitely, when it comes to things that are, like misleading or, you just can't see it on the field or whatever. Like that to me is like, that's the problem with Jamal Adams. You want to be a $18 million a year player. If you want to be the all pro, if you want to say that you're the best, you can't be misleading. You have to be this person who demands that everyone is paying attention to him in the way that he performs on the field. And if the coaches aren't changing everything to your strengths, when there shouldn't be anyone else on the team on the defense who's better, other than last year with Bobby Wagner, and there wasn't anybody else making as much money. Quandre Diggs, is a guy that went out there and people like Quandre Diggs probably more than they like Jamal Adams. Why? Because he makes a lot of those interceptions. He makes plays. Maybe it's not the most fair evaluation, but for that moment when you're, getting paid so much money and everything like that.
Yeah.
The nice thing is that, I know that I never doubt that if Jamal Adams misses a game, I don't really doubt that it's because he's really injured, because he's really unable to go. He seems to have that desire to play every down that he possibly can. So that's great. But, the Seahawks once had Earl and Cam, and both did their things to make them Hall of Fame fan favorites, at the very least, the Hall of Fame for a lot of Seahawks fans. And so they were both able to, Earl Thomas wasn't getting thrown at a lot, didn't have an opportunity to make a ton of plays, but everyone knew this is the guy that shuts down your shit. And then at the end of the game, sometimes Earl Thomas would make the game-winning play, the game-winning stop, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, Jamal Adams sometimes shows up for the bad reasons where it's like, oh, he dropped an interception or whatever, or he got beat in coverage, or maybe even he didn't get beat in coverage. He's just the closest guy, and everyone goes, it's Jamal Adams' fault when it's really not. And again, that's just sort of going back to perception. Just the perception is reality to some degree, and we want to see that out of Jamal Adams. Looking like last year he was. Let's see if I can share this screen to get that point across. But last last year compared to some of the other years. So we're looking at the Seahawks advanced stats. And Jamal Adams, 12 games, thrown at 51 times, 30 completions, 58%, 13.4 yards per completion, 7.9 yards per target, 4 touchdowns allowed. I don't want to overrate any of these numbers because, like I said, sometimes you're watching the film, you think you know what happened, but you don't really know what happened. And so maybe it's 4, maybe it was 2, maybe it was 7. I don't really know. But in terms of some of this stuff here, we just see that there's not really a hesitation or a fear. He allowed more completions. If these numbers were right, he allowed more completions than Diggs in 5 fewer games. And there was less hesitation to throw at Jamal Adams, 51 times thrown at in 5 fewer games than Quandre Diggs. It's a situation to monitor, surely. So with Jamal Adams, it would be nice to see just that aspect of the game where quarterbacks are like, I don't throw that way. I don't mess with that. And maybe receivers or tight ends are like, I don't mess with Jamal Adams. But do people mess with Jamal Adams? Maybe right now that they do. Does any other number on there stand out to you? Maybe with any other players or anything else that's on the screen?
Well, I mean, his completion percentage isn't very high, which is positive. We really got torn up. The linebackers have been just getting beat up the last couple years. And I think that's going to hopefully change this year, which I think will help. I mean, Barton and Brooks are much better in coverage. Jordan Brooks kind of got beat up last year as far as completions and targets, but I think, again, with a better scheme, with a better understanding by the team as to how to execute that scheme, as opposed to the last 3 years with Ken Norton. I mean, I just think you're going to see maybe some more. I think it's going to look better. I just think overall.
Let me ask you this. This is a psychological question.
Yes.
It's optimism time. It's July. Maybe even optimism continues through August. Maybe there's the reports out of training camp. Oh, everybody looks great. We're very happy with everybody. This guy looks good. This guy looks good. This is great. Happy about this. Maybe they go 3-0 in the preseason. Everyone's thinking, oh man, we're going to go in there, beat the Broncos, get off to a nice start here. All of that optimism. If the Seahawks are 0-5, what does that do to you, would think, at that point? Are you going to be able to, do you think at the 0-5 point you would still be sitting at and going like, I like every plan so far, I like everything that's going on, I believe in all these players? Or do you think having a higher expectation of them and then seeing, what if the Seahawks are the worst team in the league, that all of a sudden it's, well, maybe there's a time now to fire Pete Carroll or to trade Jamal Adams? Do you think it's possible to stick with this team through a bad season?
It's tough for me to say because I really don't. I just, as much as like a Bucs fan has a really strong inclination to think that they're gonna be at least in the NFC Championship game this year, I have the same strong inclination that the Seahawks are going to be around 500 and play respectable. I think last year was the first time I've ever seen full-fledged fire Pete Carroll, maybe fire John Schneider too kind of conversation. And the reality was the team stuck with the coaching staff. They didn't want to get traded. The players didn't want to rebuild after Russell was traded.
But you're saying that even if I try and give you a hypothetical scenario where the Seahawks are 0-5, I'm just asking you to comment on the possibility of being 0-5.
I think if they
refuse to even comment on it because you're that optimistic.
Well, I think if they go 0-5, they're all close enough games where you're like, man.
No, they're 0-5 and they're bad games. They're blowing out. They suck.
Okay.
If that is, anything is possible. right? So
Then,
if that happens,
then the league's, Sean Desai was one of the most sought after coaches. That means the league is wrong in that sense too. If Clint Hurt should have never gotten an opportunity, Carl Scott, after over probably close to a decade of
so
highly
you would say
respectable
what
coaching.
you're saying though is that if that happens, you're saying that Clint Hurt is a bad choice, that Sean Desai was wrong, that Carl Scott was a bad hire. That's what you're saying.
If they're 0-5, what you're saying is it time to talk about Pete getting fired, right? If we're
I'm just saying, like, would you? Because if they were 0-5, I wouldn't think anything differently of them than I do right now. I would go like, yeah, well, that's fine. Sometimes teams are bad, and I trust the process that they're going to get through this part of the season. That's where I'm saying I wouldn't give up on the Seahawks if they went 0-5 to start the season, because I would say, well, that's a possibility, because I'm not that sure that. To me, 0-5 is more realistic than 5-0 at this point of the process.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I mean, but to me, it's how they play this year. If they're 0-5 and they're getting blown out every game and everything looks very similar, like the defense is playing terrible, like it did the first half of the last two seasons, then there's something fundamentally wrong with Pete Carroll.
But why though? Because
part of it.
But I'm saying that you don't give up on Robert Saleh with the Jets last year, and the Jets were blown out. They sucked. But everybody goes, yeah, but they're in that point of their process. We're not worried about how they did in 2021 because that was where the Jets were. We aren't worried about the Jaguars. They fired Urban Meyer, but that was like a totally separate thing. Where it was like Urban Meyer wasn't going to get fired for being a bad team. He was going to be fired for being a bad coach. So we know that as long as we are comfortable that after 12 years with Pete Carroll, that he's not a bad coach, that at least we can trust that right now, the season after trading Russell Wilson, it's acceptable to be a bad team. Then I just don't see why can't we see the Seahawks in the same way that people are comfortable with the Jets and the Lions being bad teams last year, because that's where they are in their developmental process.
Yeah, but they're not that bad though. They're not that.
They were the worst teams in the NFL.
Who, the Seahawks?
No, the Jets. Oh, you're just saying you don't think the Seahawks are as bad as the Jets.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like you're talking about a team that's coming off of multiple winning seasons, nearly a decade
but
of
all that stuff is gone. All those players are gone. A lot of those coaches are gone. Dan Quinn is gone. Gus Bradley is gone. The front office, a lot of the front office personnel have moved on to other franchises. The only things that remain in place are, other than a few of the execs, like below John Schneider, are Schneider, Pete Carroll, a couple of his assistant coaches. Other than that, Tyler Lockett, like all of the success people who have been to a Super Bowl with the Seahawks are gone, with the exception of maybe 4.
True.
So isn't it okay for the Seahawks to be in a reset season where I'd look at the Jets last season? I mean, Quinnen Williams may be as good or better than any defensive lineman on the Seahawks right now. They had nice safeties, cornerbacks developing, CJ Mosley, offensive line, Elijah Tucker, there were Michael Carter. There were just I could see the Jets being a team last year that was going to be bad, but they could be good. The Jaguars with Josh Allen and Trevor Lawrence, and at least I think that it's fine for the Seahawks if we just wash ourselves of the perception of everything that we've come to know about a Pete Carroll team with the Seahawks, which is that they're usually about 10 wins. They're always in the playoffs. All that stuff was true as long as Russell Wilson was the quarterback. So for Russell Wilson, and that's even going into the 2021 season, where if Russell Wilson doesn't miss 3 games and get hurt against the Rams and kind of look like shit when he returns, if all that stuff doesn't happen, the Seahawks probably could be about a 10-win team that was in the playoffs, So it's like That was all things that were true when Russell Wilson was the quarterback who could sometimes make the plays to help you win the game and elevated the whole offense around him. And so to be in that position where now you're going with maybe the 31st best quarterback starting in the NFL, maybe the Seahawks will have that transition season where they're 3-14. It could happen because all that stuff about being a top 5 defense or a top 8 defense or whatever kind of goes out the window, as we saw last year when the defense can't get off the field, when the offense isn't helping them out by staying on the field, by gaining first downs, by moving the chains, by struggling when Geno Smith wasn't able to move the chains, when struggling even when Russell Wilson wasn't able to make the plays that Russell Wilson is typically able to make. So again, this is where I think like sometimes people go like, oh, I'm negative. I'm not being negative about the Seahawks. I've never been negative about the Seahawks. I've never even been positive about the Seahawks. I've only ever been realistic about the Seahawks. So when I see the Seahawks, when I see the experience, the resume, the validity of the resumes for the quarterbacks that are about to start for the Seahawks, when I see that they're not surrounded by, say, a 99 Rams offense with Orlando Pace several years into his career as a future Hall of Famer, Marshall Faulk about to hit the prime years of his career as a guy that had already been proven as a consistent 1,500-yard back with the Colts, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, all of these other things going on for the Rams at the time in 99. And then lucking into Kurt Warner, who is a great quarterback, and didn't have this resume of Geno Smith or Drew Lock like they have, which is all the baggage that they carry. They don't have that. And then when you look at the guys that, when they go, oh, well, Trent Dilfer and Brad Johnson, they won Super Bowls. So you're comparing the Seahawks' current defense to the 2000 Ravens or the 2002 Bucks. Not you, that, but like a person that I just made up. Well, the Seahawks don't have one of the greatest defenses of all time right now. That's where I'm just at this point where if the Seahawks start 0-5, I think Seaside Joe will be a place of, it's all good. Don't worry. This is fine. And that's why I'm also sometimes trying to set people up for that as a possibility, because it is a possibility.
Yeah.
If you were a fan of the Falcons, you would be looking at the Seahawks like, wow, at least we're not that shitty team. I mean, not just because of like that perception of being a fan of a team versus, and knowing the players day in and day out versus not knowing them day in and day out. Because I look at the Falcons and I go, yeah, that's going to be a shitty team. I look at the Panthers and I go, yeah, that's going to be a shitty team. The Seahawks, even if they surprise people, it will be a surprise. That's just where I also think like the Seahawks could. I think a surprise would be like, hey, the Seahawks might go 8-9 this year, and that would be really awesome. It might mean that they've had these breakouts, these individual breakout seasons. Maybe it's harder to have those. It is harder to have those individual breakout seasons if you go 3-14. But I still look at the Jets with extreme optimism this season. Like I'm looking at the Jets going, well, because I like Zach Wilson a lot, because I think Elijah Moore already proved what he needed to prove to me, even if he didn't have a great season last year. Even if I go, Mekhi Becton hasn't really done anything in the NFL yet, but I have optimism about him being a pretty good right tackle because of the strength he showed in the draft. I think that the Seahawks can come out of the season not looking good, but also giving fans more optimism in a year than they have right now. I think like it'll be great to just get through the season and see what transpires. But overall, I would set I set my expectations fairly low. I mean, that's just like where I'm like, oh, I have low expectations. So a good season would be, like you said, look good, obviously 0-5 and every week looks really bad. I agree. I would be probably, like, well, I guess there's something to be just, concerned about here because I even said towards the end of the season, maybe Pete Carroll has done enough to be fired at this point. Who knows?
Yeah, let's leave it all open. Who knows? But I do. Yeah, it's how they lose, right? Like if Charles Cross is continuously getting beat, there's like every great young lineman is going to have moments where they look like they don't belong, but then they eventually become more and more. They play more and more consistent. They play up to a certain level more and more consistently. But if he's constantly getting beat, then you're saying, okay, all our optimism goes out the window. That Schneider and Carroll didn't figure it out with the draft. How many drafts have the Seahawks, chalked up a terrible grade by the pundits, but then it turns out that their draft was fantastic. I mean, the likelihood of it being the opposite is just as true, right? We got great grades for the draft by a lot of people this year, and it could be that they're all terrible, but I just don't think that's going to happen, like
No, I don't think that
wholesale trash. Like you say, though, rebuilding or retooling in the NFL looks different than it does in a lot of other sports, right? It just looks different. So I think a team that's rebuilding, usually to me, a rebuilding team in the NFL is a team that's got systemic problems, that has really poor depth, that has a lot of internal personality issues, has a lot of turnover.
The Houston Texans.
Yeah, they have a certain amount of turnover, but I would say even more so like a team like the Jags, right? The Jags have way more turnover. And to me, they're so far off. Like, we're not going to be in the same way. Like the Jets, even, like they have developed a lot of good players. They have had, like, for years, right? The last 3 or 4 years, they've had young players that have developed and shown to be some of the top players in the league, but they also show that they have terrible depth. And they have so many internal issues, like Greg Williams being their defensive coordinator. He's a divisive coach, which makes him not a very good coach. Schematically, he might be a good coach, but ultimately he's not a good motivator. He doesn't allow people to trust him. And I think it kind of goes back to my excitement for the season is that we really don't have any expectations. If we go, how many disappointing seasons have we had, save for, let's take out last year. We go into the season with an expectation, rightly so, as a fan, thinking that we're a playoff team, and then we just have this really poor showing at the end of the season. Like, to me, that's way more disappointing than fighting for 500 or whatever that is nowadays, right? 8-9 or 9-8, and then just making it in. Like, to me, that's going to be way more exciting and more interesting, especially because we actually broke up with our hot girlfriend. Like, we finally said, okay, I know she's hot, but you know what? She doesn't text me back, for like a week at a time, like she's, we have all these great, she's great in bed, but like she never picks up her clothes. Like, these are all things that Russell Wilson was for us, and we never broke up with him. And to do that, to finally break up with him, whether it's just quarterback or not, it's really a whole schematic thing. And when you have so much continuity with coaches, so much positive communication with the new coaches and with the new players, you have Jordan Brooks like saying, I really miss Bobby Wagner. But in the same interview, he's saying, but at the same time, we are all super stoked as young, talented players to make an impact and to take over the team. So that's a positive, right? Whereas you have coaches like Urban Meyer, they're retooling, they're rebuilding, whatever, but they're also like starting at zero a lot of times, whereas this team, to me, it's a powder keg. And whether it's this year or next year, there's a possibility that, like, all I want to see is competitive, tight ball games. If we're 0-5, I'm on with you. Maintain the course. If I really don't think it's going to happen, 0-5 and everything isn't working, but it's a stay the course year. And with these with the players that you're talking about, like Kenneth Walker, and by week 10, we might be having Kenneth Walker average 120 yards a game, and Lucas and Cross and maybe Forsyth is in there somewhere, looking like they actually belong. I mean, especially the first.
It's definitely. I mean, I don't. But yeah, you're also not wrong though that we have no idea how Charles Cross is going to do in the NFL.
Yeah,
we have no idea how these guys are actually going to perform, because it's every single year and especially I think offensive tackles have been a really big kind of guessing game, because we saw, a couple years ago, Mekhi Becton, Andrew Thomas, Jedrick Wills, Tristan Wirfs. And Tristan Wirfs was the last of those guys to be drafted. He's also been the best. He's also a right tackle and not a left tackle at this point. And Andrew Thomas had a very bad first year, and then he had a very good second year. And then, Jedrick Wills and Mekhi Becton, they've been kind of like not all over the place. So it really could be Charles Cross. There's things that I really like about him, and there's things that were unknown about him, but I feel very positive about him. I would have a high expectation of Charles Cross over the haul of, the next 3 years total. First year should probably come with some growing pains, So that's going to be one of those things too. It's like you talked about the momentum of the season, and like if the Seahawks finish poorly, if the Seahawks had flipped their season in 2009, they might not have fired Jim Mora. They fired Jim Mora because he was so bad at the end of the season. The team was so embarrassing at the end of the season that they couldn't stand it anymore. So, at least if you're bad in the beginning of the season, you have a whole rest of the year to, unless you get fired, obviously, to sort of leave a positive taste in everyone's mouth before you go into the offseason. That has saved many a coach's job. And I think that Pete Carroll, if one thing he has definitely proven is that he is a second half coach, whether that's the second half of a season or a second half of a game. Usually the Seahawks bring it more after they've had time to adjust all their faults and correct their mistakes or whatever it is, or find things to exploit in the opposing team. So the Seahawks, I think that there's just no part of me that's ever going to give up one of the most basic beliefs in football, sports, whatever. Talent wins. Talent on the field wins. Talented players. The team will come together if you got talented players. Like all teams have intangibles. All teams can talk about the things that the reasons they believe they're going to surprise everyone and win and everything like that. They can all say anything. Everybody's story sounds the same. Coaches around the league are going to say the same shit about different players over and over and over again. Players are going to say the same shit. They're not going to be negative. Everyone's going to feel pretty positive about themselves. But at the end of the day, it was the team with Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey and Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford and Von Miller that won the Super Bowl. It was a team with Andrew Whitworth and Leonard Floyd, and they were going up against a team with, I would say the Bengals even are one of the least talented Super Bowl teams to make the Super Bowl in the last 10 years. But just like the 2013 Seahawks, hell of a fucking team, So whether or not the Seahawks have those players in place now, there's just a very short list of guys that we know are on it, like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and these really talented Quandre Diggs players. And then there's another short list of guys that we think are going to be joining them soon, like Darrell Taylor and Kenneth Walker and Charles Cross. And then there's a long list of guys that we're just like, is he ever going to do anything in the league? And that's kind of where the Seahawks will prove that this year and this building plan in 2022 was good or bad or fine, which is whether or not they have 3 or 4 really huge, impactful starters out of that group. And of that, the last thing that we'll talk about maybe before signing off, I also mentioned a couple of front 7 players. I feel like it would be great to have optimism around Uchenna Nwosu. I think that could be the low-key signing of the year, big addition that, we're kind of overlooking a lot, and maybe locally, globally, whatever. This is a guy that was pretty productive for the LA Chargers. We've seen Pete Carroll bring in pass rushers and edge rushers and get more out of them than they had gotten out of their previous stops, like Cliff Averill and Chris Clemens and Michael Bennett. So I think Uchenna Nwosu having that opportunity in, as you say, Clint Hurtt's 3-4 defense to rush opposite Gerald Taylor, to get in there, to be that other force on the other side of the line. He's got this huge motivation to play well, which is his 2023 salary, which he will earn, and it's a lot more money than he's making in 2022 if he has a great season. So I would say Uchenna Nwosu maybe could be the defensive breakout player of this training camp here. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on Nwosu?
I'm very excited for him. I'm very happy. My brother and I, Hugh Cox fan, my bro, Arthur Hen. We were very excited about that signing, and I think there's a good reason to be optimistic. He's coming from a good culture, and like you said, he's motivated. I think we've simplified our scheme because we kind of have done this thing where we sign these pass rushers. Like you said, we've been able to do it, but what I see is we kind of overdo it, right? Like having Benson Mayoa and Dunlap and these young guys that we're trying to develop into edge rushers. To me, it just seemed like too many guys in the rotation, whereas Nwosu's just sort of the one big, we signed a few others, but he's the one big focal point of the offseason in terms of getting him involved in the scheme, in terms of building around him, in terms of players getting to know his tendencies and how he plays, which makes me really excited. It's just they picked a guy, they're going to focus on him, they're going to insert him into the front there, and let's see what happens. I'm really excited. I don't know, and if he does well, if anybody on the D line, whether it's from the edge or the interior, if they have a breakout year, that is a cascading that has positive cascading effect on the rest of the team, when it comes to the way that sacks work and the way that where'd you go there, buddy? If you can hit the quarterback, the entire defense changes for the better. That's my point. Kenneth didn't like my take, so he bounced, I guess. You there, buddy? His computer might have died. But I'll say this, to add to Kenneth's newsletter, the last part of his newsletter was speaking on the second to third point he made. So his fourth point was there's going to be a buzz.
Internet connection.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just backing up your point here about the buzz about Nwosu, and I ultimately, if any one of those players on the inside, either the interior or the edge, if any one of those defensive players has a breakout season, it's just such a positive. It makes the entire defense better, right? When there's somebody that's getting to the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, it's the game. I mean, we saw the Rams, even the Rams having had Aaron Donald, the best interior pass rusher in the NFL, one of the most disruptive players in the NFL, easily. Even at that point, they still had to trade 2 day 2 picks to add Von Miller to that defense. They've signed Leonard Floyd to this big contract. It's one of the big weaknesses on the Rams this year. It's just their edge rushing and the fact that they don't have it. And it's just like, even when you have Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, you still got to have some edge rushing help. And, for the Seahawks, knowing that Gerald Taylor has a lot of potential to be a great pass rusher, but still being unsure about, the whole picture, because there's a big difference when you go from 500 defensive snaps to the idea of 900 defensive snaps, run defense, pass rushing, disruption, constantly being a focus. Like, these guys who are the best of the best at doing that, even the Bengals last year, just going back to other Super Bowl teams, with Trey Hendrickson, and there was a positive guy there to bring in some of that. They had some great defensive players last season. You look at the Bucks with their huge pass rush when they won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and going this past season, with Jason Pierre-Paul and Devin White and Sue, and it just keeps on going on and on. So for the Seahawks, they've been lacking that interior pass rusher at nose tackle, defensive tackle for many years. I think that is a reason why I was talking about, Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt before this year's draft, why I think that a guy like Jalen Carter out of Georgia next year could be a target for the Seahawks, why Will Anderson could be a more attractive option for the Seahawks if they do get a top 2 pick to draft Alabama linebacker, edge rusher Will Anderson over a quarterback, maybe if they were in that such of a position. One reason they might not, though, obviously, is if Nwosu had some crazy breakout, if Mafe has a great rookie season with a lot of reason for optimism, Alton Robinson, Tyreek Smith, there's possibilities there abound. But obviously it starts with Darrell Taylor and then Nwosu potentially being that guy to pick it up. On the other side of the thing, I think maybe this is the year to finally end the relationship with LJ Collier and potentially try and see if there was any way to trade him if the Seahawks wanted to look for an opportunity to trade him. I don't know what team out there would be interested in making an acquisition, but sometimes with former first-round picks, you never know. You get a pick swap, you do something just to sort of get that guaranteed salary off the books. But after trading for Shelby Harris in the offseason, after re-signing Quentin Jefferson, after re-signing Al Woods, after extending Brian Monet, there's just not that many players on the roster, or I'd say there's not that many roster spots left at this point. It's going to be LJ Collier maybe against some of these other guys like a Gerard Hewitt or a Miles Adams, which may not seem that enticing yet, but if a good training camp happens for any one of these guys, well, why not? What is LJ Collier really bringing to the table at this point? How do you feel about LJ Collier and going into year 4?
Yeah, I mean, it's make or break for him. They have simplified his role in the defense. They wanted to use him in a more dynamic way, like moving him inside and outside the last couple of years. It hasn't really worked out. I think he's going to be somebody that should benefit from the new defense being implemented.
I think also though, if anyone ever comes to me at my job and says, you know what we're going to do? We've simplified things for you. Okay. I would start to worry about my job if they're trying to figure out ways to simplify things for me,
I mean, it could be a positive too, yeah, but that's kind of what they've done. That's what the defense has wanted to do. The coaching staff has wanted to do with everybody's role,
Right.
He should benefit from it. If he doesn't, yeah, I mean, you're probably going to have to cut him. He'll probably have to have a good preseason, but maybe just not fit in. Like somebody else would have to have a better preseason for him to get traded, I think. But he has to show something, right? Because he's really hasn't been very consistent.
He's also 26 going on 27, so he didn't come into the NFL as a 21-year-old.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, I just think he's part of this whole interesting story. It's just I'm just so excited to actually have this sort of, I would say, partially written story. I wouldn't say it's a blank. It's not this chapter of Seahawks history isn't necessarily like a blank page, because there are things that are going to happen that we can most assuredly bet on. Metcalf's going to continue to ascend, hopefully. Lockett's going to, without injury, Lockett's going to have he's going to be open. He's going to have an opportunity to succeed. I think the defensive line, the interior of the defensive line is much more solidified. I think there's less question marks, and I think there's something that you can really expect out of that, out of the interior there.
So, the positives for LJ Collier is that there are positives elsewhere on the team.
Well, right, because I think, like, okay, you know, with the Warriors, right, the Golden State Warriors basketball team, like Andrew Wiggins is a controversial player that got traded to the Warriors a couple years ago. They took on a big contract with him. He was the #1 draft pick. You know, he was supposed to play with LeBron. He got traded pretty quickly. He wasn't really working out. Part of the reason he wasn't really working out is because he's like Kevin Durant's size. You know, he's like 6'8" or something, but he's not exactly the same kind of player as him. So, like, during the Warriors championship run, after one of the wins against Boston, somebody asked, a post game asked Stephen Curry, like, why has Wiggins been so good on the Warriors as opposed to other teams? And Curry said very straightforward, in a very straightforward manner, he said, on our team, everybody has a very specific goal, or they have a very specific role to play. And when you're inserted into that role, it simplifies your game, and then you can go ahead and succeed, you know? And I think that's not necessary. I think Collier, you know, could have done more with what he was asked to do the last couple of years, but regardless of that, he was asked to do a lot more, you know, than he should have been ultimately. And this season is going to be kind of an Andrew Wiggins season for him. Like, hey, here's a few things you got to do. Go do it. If you don't do it, somebody else is going to.
Yeah, that's his challenge in training camp, you know,
right.
Is because if overthecap.com is correct, the Seahawks will save $1 million by releasing LJ Collier. And that means that LJ Collier has to be $1 million better than the competition. And when you're in a specialized role where they're like saying, we got 200 perfect snaps for you this season. Well, why can't you just give those to Gerard Hewitt? If it's only 200 snaps, if he's only going to be playing in certain situations, because situational players are exactly the type that you get as undrafted free agents and day 3 picks. And, you know, really at this point, it seems like LJ Collier is living off of the first round status and has to be judged now. If anything, the first round status is now working against him, because it has to be a point of, you need to play like a drafted player, not even a first round player, because, you know, he did so little in his first 3 years, especially last year too. You know, played in 10 games, didn't have any sacks. Not even if you're saying, well, that's not his, and if anyone, well, that's not his specialty. Well, that's a problem. You know, if you're not any sort of pass rusher whatsoever, and you play defensive end, even in a 3-4, you know, that's the type of role that you would think, yeah, just draft that guy, like Tyreek Smith. Just draft that guy in the 5th round. Why worry about it, you know? So that's where Tyreek Smith maybe is another guy who could push for that roster spot over LJ Collier. And it wouldn't, you know, it's not the biggest even point to, is who can, you know, LJ Collier here, not there. It really doesn't seem to really matter so much at this point, as opposed to some of these other guys we're talking about, like Nwosu and Jordan Brooks and Gerald Taylor, all the guys that you want to do well this year, because you know that their ceilings are very impactful if they reach that, you know. And I do think you can spin the defense that we're looking at right now for the Seattle Seahawks and say, even just looking at the first couple of lines here, positively, you know, if this front 7 is, you know, pretty good, and, you know, Taylor and Nwosu are a good sack duo, and Mafe as a trio, and, you know, Jordan Brooks getting better in coverage and stopping the run. The Seahawks are good at that. You know, maybe there's a combination with the safeties to, you know, be an aggressive defense that does well. Maybe the ceiling for the Seahawks is somewhere that is more than respectable. And then obviously offensively, hoping for a very strong run first attack, an improved play from the offensive line, picking up, like we said, off from last year, and then these really dangerous passing weapons that elevates whichever quarterback ends up playing for the Seahawks. And then the Seahawks could have a good special teams unit on top of all that kind of stuff. So that's where I do think, a ceiling conversation is 500-ish, if I'm talking about the ceiling conversation. And then, the floor conversation gets very tricky because the Seahawks, I think, have not had a floor that they're looking at this year. They haven't had a floor like that since Russell Wilson became the quarterback. And that was in conjunction with, coincidentally almost, the fact that the defense was about to be the best in the NFL too. I thought you were going to say something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, no, and I would say, as far as ball control, I think we're going to get back to that play action style, which will contribute to. I mean, Russell's first few games in the league, it didn't look like we had a very high. We didn't, there was definitely a floor conversation after those first few games. He did win some games, but he lost some games too.
Yeah, his first 7-8 games, he was pretty bad overall as a quarterback. But also within those games, I think there was obviously the win over the Packers. Then he had the throw against the Patriots, and there were reasons to be like, wow, the Seahawks. And also in the preseason, there were reasons to be like, wow, the Seahawks found a gem in Russell Wilson. Obviously, this is fantastic. For that to happen this year, just really, that's where, again, we're going back full circle to the start of the podcast where I just say maybe that could happen with Drew Lock. I don't think so. I don't think anybody really thinks that. But there's a possibility that exists where a good season by Drew Lock, or like I said multiple times in the offseason, there's about 10 bad starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and we don't really talk about it that often. But about a third of the NFL is constantly being replaced. So to be in a Drew Lock position or a Geno Smith position, you're not very far away from being the 20th best quarterback in the NFL. I don't see how they could possibly get any higher than that, where you're talking about the guys who are actually elevating their teams into the Super Bowl status. And I do think that football is largely based on having that quarterback who is like a just a phenomenal football player who kind of goes out there and beats the other team every week, and then you give him as much help as possible. And the Seahawks, they need more help, and they need a better quarterback. And those are the things that we're going to find out this year. But I think we'll probably focus more on how's the help, how's the defense, how's the offensive line. Those are going to be the two big questions: offensive line, defense, and then putting that quarterback into place next year through the draft. We'll have a lot of conversations about the 2023 draft over the next 9 months, and that will continue as well through the season. And I'm sure that, and then the college season starts in about 6.5, 7 weeks. And that'll be another opportunity to talk about some of the guys who could come in and be the quarterback after Geno Smith or Drew Lock or whatever it may be. But I like these conversations where, hey, I'm maybe saying I need to be reminded of, that miracles can happen. That the Seahawks, that good things can happen. And I do have a positive outlook on the Seahawks. I do think that my positive outlook on the Seahawks involves maybe not the best win-loss record, which isn't so necessarily important to me at this point. That I don't think that the Seahawks, I'm not going to ever be one of these guys that goes, the Seahawks shouldn't even try to win a game because I know how overrated the number one pick is. I know how overrated getting the best quarterback is.
Yeah.
If you forgot the Russell Wilson era, you don't have to get the best quarterback prospect in order to get the best quarterback. So let's not worry so much about tanking. I just think that, hey, the Seahawks, they weren't in a position to get a great quarterback this year. They will be next year. It'll be fine. And we'll wrap it up there. Thad is rad on Twitter. Thad, what else, would you like to say before we sign off?
No, I just think it's I think this year is just, I'm excited. I've said it before with you. I've said it before with others. I'm just really excited to see, we're not talking about what should happen. We're talking about what might happen, which I think is two different conversations, right? And having that conversation about what should happen, and then ultimately having a quarterback who basically did not have his heart in it the last couple of years. Yeah. Man, that's a sad conversation. That's a sad reality. This year, you have so many people that wanted to stay on the team, that wanted to re-sign with the Hawks. You have a defensive coaching staff that sought out the Seahawks. Desai was one of the highest regarded assistant coaches in the NFL. He really could have gotten a job almost anywhere. He wanted to work for Seattle. He wanted to work for Pete Carroll. The draft was really good. We're going to see the tight ends used more this year. I'm just excited. I'm just really excited.
Yeah.
Even if we go 3-14, I just think overall we're just going to be looking better, playing better, and we're going to have a better idea where this franchise is headed after this season. Better than any year in a long time. We're going to know where we're headed.
Yeah. There's I don't like to spend too much time talking about, intangibles and these types of things, because I just like that the things you can hold and touch and but at the end of the day, is there you can sense the different energy that everybody has talking about the Seahawks this year as opposed to the last few years, a different energy focusing on some of the things that the Seahawks finally needed to force themselves to focus on by not having an all-encompassing, attention-grabbing quarterback. And, sometimes the absence of that really great quarterback can help you get a better grasp on everything else on the roster, which is what the Seahawks were doing prior to acquiring Russell Wilson, with all the building that went on in 10 and 11 and 12. That was the foundation of a Super Bowl team in 2013 was, being able to focus on those needs by trading for Marshawn Lynch, by drafting Okung and Earl Thomas, and by installing some of these players who had no choice but to buy in to this coach and this new sort of philosophy and everything from Cam Chancellor to Michael Bennett to, all these guys that were able to buy in at that point. And now that there's a new start at quarterback, it's going back to how do we build this foundation? How do we go focus on these other needs? Everything that's going to help support the Seahawks win a Super Bowl, because obviously when the Seahawks did win a Super Bowl, it was at a time when Russell Wilson's value to the team was much lesser than it was by the time he was off of the team. When it went from he's one part of this, who's just executing and efficient and doing everything that, not hurting the team, to most of this team is now Russell Wilson. So without that guy, we can now talk about well, what would the team need to do to fix, what would the team need to do well to get to the playoffs without a quarterback? And so go do those things, then add the quarterback, and the Seahawks could be a Super Bowl championship team again.
Yeah.
I think that the quarterback is necessary. I think that the team is necessary. So those two things will come together in the next 2 years, I would say.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode of Seaside Joe. Follow Seaside Joe on Twitter at Seaside Joe News, but then also quit Twitter if you heard the conversation in the beginning of the show. And if you haven't heard that conversation, then I guess go back and watch it from the beginning. And that's it. Oh, seasidejoe.substack.com for a daily Seahawks newsletter. Probably should have said that in the beginning, but it's fine. Anybody who watches this probably knows about that. So that's it for this episode of Seaside Joe. I will also add the audio here to the Seaside Joe podcast feed, which again, if you're hearing this, why would you go listen to the audio? So I don't know why I'm promoting this now at the end. And I'm going to say that's it again. I'm Kenneth Arthur. He's Thad Wenatchee. This is Seaside Joe, and I will talk to you after some maybe after some training camp has happened.
Oh yeah,